an incredible conversation with really good friend of mine, an amazing neurologist and just human in this world, Dr. Daniel Potts. Welcome this morning, Dr. Danny.
Thank you so much, Deborah. My pleasure to be with you.
Of course. My relationship with Danny goes back a good ways, and he's going to go a little bit more into his story, but he and I have some important things in common around Alzheimer's and our experience as dementia caregivers. Not all of our conversations with soul health conversations will be about this, but I'm sure Danny will also describe how much that journey has changed his life, changed his practice, changed how we see the world. And that is why I think our conversation around dementia and soul work and personhood and how we connect with others and transformation is such an important conversation, regardless of how God uses that in order to bring us to those places. And so just as a reminder to everyone, Soul Health Conversations is really born out of a desire that I really felt led to engage in deeper conversations about our lives and how the things that we are doing that are important to us are first of all, birthed from the Lord in our experiences, but also how those things connect with what other people in the world are going through, so that what we're going through can really be used as an opportunity for other people to live a richer and more abundant life themselves in every part of their lives. And that's what Soul Health Conversations is really about, engaging in those conversations with people that so many people out here in the world may not even know or have come across, and that we get an opportunity to connect. And in the connection is where we get to experience healing and wholeness in our lives. And so that is the point. And so I just want to share a little bit about Dr. Danny. And I know that you're going to be blessed by this conversation. I really do. So Danny is a neurologist at the VA and the University of Alabama, whose father, Lester, became a watercolor artist after the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. This transformation in his father, at a time when Danny was struggling with his father's condition and his own burnout, led to the first movements of a spiritual awakening in Danny that has transformed his practice and changed his thinking about persons living with dementia and other disabilities. His interests lie in finding the persistent self, giving it expression through creativity, and building a culture of compassion based on a theology of personhood and its relevance to those living with dementia and their caregivers. And that is not even enough that I could say about Danny. And so, Danny, I just, again, thank you so much for being here. Can you share a little bit about that rich part of your story?
Absolutely, Deborah. So let me just say again, it's an honor to be with you. And thank you for being a friend to me and my wife, and others in our circle of friends with whom we've connected you, and we've been connected because it truly has been bound up spiritually, and we're thankful for that. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
So yes, all of that I guess is a nice summary for where we are right now.
Right.
And so
it's so much more, right?
Well, yes, but I think the sort of the kernel of where we're living now is kind of in that somewhere. And
yeah.
It comes out of the struggle, of my father's Alzheimer's and of all our family went through with that around him.
Right.
And so I'll touch on that just briefly give you a little word of introduction about that.
Yes.
A neurologist, an only child from rural Alabama. That's me. And my parents. Folks, my mother's still living. My dad passed in 2007. He had Alzheimer's. He was a rural Alabama sawmiller, hardworking guy, very faithful, solid man, as righteous as could be, I think, sort of my hero. And Dad began to struggle with early signs of dementia, probably in the late 1990s and by early 2000s. He had gotten a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And
how old was he then?
He was about 70.
Okay, yeah.
when he got the diagnosis. He had some early signs we didn't see, and of course I had a lot of guilt for that, being a neurologist. I mean, denied what I saw and heard from my mother, that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
but the fact of the matter was he did have Alzheimer's, and it was pretty brutal, of course. I mean, he was a very capable man, used to being able to do things for himself, build stuff, create stuff, be a leader in the community, et cetera. And he began to lose those abilities. It was tough on him and mother and all of us.
Yeah.
He got depressed about it. Fortunately, an adult daycare here in town, Caring Days in Tuscaloosa, faith-based organization, came to the rescue. And Dad was able to go down there several days a week. And down there was affirmed as being Lester, despite Alzheimer's. I was trained to look at losses. I was get a patient and see what they've lost, see what their deficits are, and try to help correct that.
Right.
But the folks at Caring Day saw, here's Lester, here's what he can do, here's what he can bring to the table, and they honored that. Yes,
yeah,
he is, and so that's what they gave him.
Mm-hmm.
And down there he met an artist named George Parker, who was volunteering his time to share his artistic gift with folks there. He was not an art therapist, but he sure did know how to share his gift.
Mm-hmm.
And my
all right.
George Parker, a retired artist, shared his dad and others at Caring. And Dad brought home a little hummingbird, the first painting he did on a little 9x14 canvas. And Mother said, "That, honey, that's beautiful." He said, "I did it myself." She said, "What, did you trace it, darling?"
Yeah.
"No, I did it." And sure enough, he did.
Wow.
And it was beautiful. And, Deborah, he brought more just like that over the next 3 years. And,
3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is really the kernel of how all of the revelations and miracles were taking place with your dad about art and his creativity, correct?
That's right, Deborah. That's right. That's exactly right. Dad, I was struggling, and I even feel guilty saying that I was struggling, because my dad's the one that had Alzheimer's. But I was struggling in trying to be a neurologist and be an advisor for my mother about how to care for him and stuff like that. And we didn't learn that in med school. We didn't learn that in neurology residency. Those caregiving things we didn't. So I struggled with that. I was in a dark place and trying to search and find the light, of course. And lo and behold, the light God had sent to my dad was coming right through him, was coming right through the one with the disability. And God opened my eyes to see that. And that has changed my life and practice, Deborah.
Yeah, I for people that may not know my story, obviously I'm a caregiver too. It's been 11 years, and it's oftentimes a long journey. But one of the things that I've just learned, I think sometimes we do get some things with age and wisdom that youth can't give you. But this understanding of how God works through what we see as tragedies and turmoil in our life. And then as we come through it, because our greatest lessons really come in hindsight. We keep pushing through the other side, then God begins to show us more, right? He doesn't show us when we're going through it. But this idea of persevering through it and coming to the other side, and then being able to see these threads that God was weaving together the whole time in us, even for the person that will one day leave us, that there was this exchange taking place in this process that seems so messy and so what appeared to be tragic. And then on the other side of it, you're saying, I didn't know God was weaving all that together in me. And that, I think, and I'll just share with other people that you are a spiritual leader in your church, a deacon. Am I right about that?
Elder.
Yeah. Elder in your church. And sometimes we think that just being a spiritual leader and pastor, that, we have all these lessons to learn about life, just like anyone else, but how God uses these odd things that seem like they're not at all treasures. And we come out of it changed. And so I I'm just so grateful you sharing that part of your story. Tell me, what ways do you think it began to change you the most when you look back?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned, was trained to look at loss and identify disability and try to correct things and try to cure things and that sort of thing. But what Dad showed me is that sometimes we're not going to have a pill for that. We're not going to be able to make those things go away. In fact, a lot of the time we're not. And loss is not the most important thing about all of that. The most important thing about all of that is what is present, what remains, what we can do with what's there, and how we can help people to live well in spite of the condition. And so Dad and the folks at Caring Days, quite frankly, showed this neurologist that, hey, here's how we find what's there, and here's how we build upon that. Those pillars, I call them pillars of personhood, those parts of the self that still are there, that we can build a relationship on and show this person, yeah, you've got a lot to give back. And so, that's the biggest, I guess, thing is that I try to do now with my patients, is to learn from that. And here's how, for instance, I saw a man not too long ago.
I was going to ask you to share an example. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw someone not too long ago with his wife, and he was living with dementia. And as you know, is often the case, the person living with dementia, if you ask them how they're doing okay,
all the time, no matter what.
Yeah. But the spouse, of course, told me the story of all the things he couldn't do, all the things he was struggling with, all the things he couldn't remember, and that sort of thing. And so at the end of all that, I says, well, Mr. So-and-so, what can you do? And what do you enjoy doing? And he said, I enjoy being around my grandchildren. And that led to other things that he also enjoys, his dog, his garden, etc. And then we began to talk about, okay, well, how can we do more of that? How can we capture some time about, around those things? And I don't know if it'll work or not, but it's certainly something to think about and to try to do.
Right.
And so that's one way it's changed. I think another thing that has changed is it has caused me to be authentic. So when I'm working with people with Alzheimer's and other dementias, they're authentic because they got to be at a certain stage. Even if they've still got this social self that they try to put on a face that everything is okay, eventually even that fades away.
It does.
And we're left with raw authenticity, and that's important. And so for many, many years, I think I was in many ways inauthentic, not because I wanted to be, but just because that's the way I approach the world in reality. And hey, I came crashing down around all of this, Deborah. As I said, I experienced burnout, and I was in a place I didn't want to be. I took people with me I didn't want to take there, and so raw authenticity hit me in the face. And so it's you look at all that, you confess all that, you realize, hey, if it weren't for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here. And you also say, the unseen hand, I got to reach up and hold that, or I can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so, and that authenticity piece has been very important. And I'm sorry for the person that I am without God, thankful and humbled by the person that I can be with God. So that's another thing. And that's probably, I guess, the most important thing, that transformative piece, Deborah, that we've talked about so much.
Yeah, it is. I think about the becoming whole process that God takes us through when we surrender to it. And that process happens in really 7 areas of our life. And, one of those areas is our relationships and our emotions and our faith. Those are a few of them. But when I listen to your story and I listen to, kind of that pathway, it's the place that we often avoid going that God is going to use to bring us into the fullness of who he wants us to become. So I say to people often, the very thing that you have lived and have persevered through and have surrendered to in your own life it's not, it's a different, like, the person may wear different clothes. It may show up in their life a different way. But what God is using is usually these times that we really would rather avoid. Okay. And so when I hear you, I don't hear anything negative. What I hear is a person that surrendered to the process, even regardless of the time it took or the valley one might be in. What I'm hearing is someone that was evolving in the process, surrendered to the process, and then God was able to move that person to the other side and into the place that he really wanted him to begin with. And I think it is so like God that we look at someone with Alzheimer's, a child with autism, whatever the case might be, and we see the wound, we see the hurt. And I'm not saying that it's not real. It is very real. These are illnesses and afflictions that affect our life. It affects our dream life. It affects how we thought life would be. It affects all of those things. Usually at the kernel, the person that's going through it, in some of these cases, like my mom always says, I'm fine, and I don't know if I'm fine is as much a physiological revelation as a spiritual one. And so I take it like she's at peace, and so then the whole thing is about us coming to peace. And so I just hear in your story, breakthrough after breakthrough into the becoming whole process that God intends. How has the journey then in turn affected your family? Because as you said, this is a whole, like, you don't go through this alone. So how has it relationally changed you?
Well, what you've said is so profound, and it is so true. The concept of the comforts, and I hope you'll let me start here. I'm getting to where you
absolutely.
want me to go, but because I want to tag off something you said, mm-hmm. the idea that the comforts that God gives to an individual that you and I may feel as suffering. We may even say someone's suffering with dementia, someone's suffering with Alzheimer's. The comforts that God can give to that human being, which are unknown to us, may be glorious, may be unbelievable, mysterious, deep. So, I think Dad was being given those sorts of comforts in some of the dark stages.
Yep.
And so starting there, I will also say that coming up against people who in your family, your loved ones who are going through something like that, coming up against that, letting yourself touch that tragedy, if you want to call it that, certainly changes you, and it causes you to weep, but like Simone says, touching that which causes you to weep can unleash the fires of hope within you. And so that, I think, is what happened, but coming together as a family around that.
Yeah.
It caused all of us to really touch something, I guess, that lies in each one of us. I mean, I think we touched death. We saw ourselves in Dad. We saw Dad in ourselves. And so you're really dealing with your own mortality when you come in contact with somebody with a disability like that or a terminal illness like that. And it takes you through that dark place. And the dark place can be rough, and it was. And so our family stayed with each other. There were some casualties, but we stayed with each other, wounded as we were, coming through that. And I'm thankful for that. The circle of the unbroken circle, and I'm grateful to my family. I can't even begin to mention how grateful I am that stood by me, and all of us stood together. But you come out on that and things are stronger, of course. Yeah. And you've got a story to tell that is a triumphant story. You don't shy away from the tragedy, but you got the triumph you can talk about. You can help others. And that's the thing. I came from a service-minded family, and they believe in, hey, what you've got, you give back. And they taught me that. And so that's what we're trying to live into and do that. And so I know that God's going to be faithful to honor that and to bring that story out. Even when weak as I am, unfaithful as I am, God's going to bring that out, I hope.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think about like listening to what you're saying about that, and I think about from a church perspective, and I think about I mean, we know there are doctrines out there, and that's okay. I just think that there's something to be gained from not always painting the spiritual picture that God will fix everything.